Hi everyone, welcome back to the TELF Training Institute podcast. I'm Ross Thorburn, and before we get into it this week, I wanted to play you a quote from Yuval Noah Harari, author of Sapiens. This is him on Sam Harris's Making Sense podcast, talking about, of all things, online teaching.
Is this shift to online teaching? This can lead to all kinds of dangerous directions. A lot of the experience of going to college doesn't happen in class, it happens during the break time. And with teaching courses online at Zoom, of course there are break times, but you're alone in your home. You don't meet the other students for a chat in the cafeteria. And I think that whatever happens to education, we should always remember the very central role of the community and of the social interaction.
So I wanted to play this for two reasons. First, to me, it's amazing that people like Yuval Noah Harari and Sam Harris are now talking about online teaching. And second, because what you just heard him say about the importance of what happens outside of the classroom. I think it's so easy to forget with online teaching, and I think this is true of the podcasts that we've done recently here on this topic, that we tend to focus on the changes that have happened inside the classroom. But for so many of our students, and obviously for so many of you that are listening, the coronavirus has really changed for millions and millions of people what's going on for them outside of the classroom. And obviously in language teaching, so much of what we do inside the classroom is based on what's going on in our students' lives. We obviously always try to personalize our lessons based on, students' interests or jobs, hobbies, vacations, whatever. And if you're in a part of the world where students are also in self-isolation, that's going to have a huge impact on what you can get students to talk about inside the classroom. And I want to bring this up at the beginning because that's really one of the themes I think that came up in this week's interview with Morag MacIntosh. Morag works for Live Language in Glasgow, mainly teaching academic English and helping students there prepare for IELTS. And Morag's also currently studying for her diploma in TESOL. For the last few weeks, Morag's been teaching online and really is an inspiration, I think, in this area, in just finding resources that I would never really have thought to use in the classroom, but using them to great effect. So in this interview, Morag and I talk about the reality of teaching online, but not just teaching online, but teaching online during this period of self-isolation due to the coronavirus. Enjoy the interview. Morag, thanks so much for coming on. I really wanted to talk to you about this because, to be honest, a lot of what I read online in terms of teaching tips at the moment seems to come from people who've never actually taught online, and they certainly aren't doing it now.
No. And there's things like, say to your students, what was the best thing you did yesterday? What was the most exciting thing? And that is right now, that has been published, like to say to your students. They haven't been out of their house. You're not allowed to go out. You can't say what is the best thing. There's no good thing about it at all. A lot of the stuff you read is not suitable.
Yeah, I think that just shows how out of touch some people really are at the moment with the reality of what's going on. This is the other thing with online teaching, like simply taking what happens offline and trying to put it in an online classroom. It just doesn't work.
I think it's so intensive when you're online. I think the students get very tired. It's very concentrated. So you can't just replicate the classroom in any way at all. That just wouldn't work out. I think it really definitely needs to be a different approach. And why would you use pictures in a course book when you can have your own pictures that you've taken? Why, you can share a screen of something from your country. You can show the real thing in your house.
Absolutely. So let's talk then about some of the activities that maybe are more suitable for online teaching, especially at the moment. I presume a lot of the activities that you're doing in class now, you've just discovered through trial and error. Is that right?
Yeah, I think that because we didn't have any training, I think we had to rely on our own resources more. We didn't have a lot of course books. We've got a lot now because they've been produced for us and we've been given access to them. But at first we just had to think outside the box and, use the resources that we had here, use the environment, just work with what we had on the spot.
And that environment that you mentioned there, Morag, is that just the students and the apartments that they're in, where they literally physically are right now?
Yes. I'm talking about their physical environment because you're in their living room or some other room and it's their personal space and it's ready-made, authentic materials, isn't it? And you don't have to think, is this authentic, or how can I make it communicative, or how can I make this realistic? It's realistic already. We don't need to have that problem. We use things like they bring things to show us, like we'll go around and look at their rooms, we'll look at their furniture, ask questions about that. One day we had somebody who they had a flat pack TV delivered, and we helped him. So the instructions were in every language, but of course the one that we couldn't understand any of them. So we needed some help with that and what tools to use. So we had a lesson in that kind of vocabulary about tools like spanner, hammer, all of these things that people wouldn't normally. And then we could see the physical things as well.
I love that example. That's brilliant. I can remember teaching a unit on household tools before, and it certainly wasn't very contextualized like that. Again, a great example of how actually teaching students from home can be better for some topics. So was that something that you planned there, or was that something that was just improvised?
It sort of evolved because he was saying that he kept getting deliveries like every few minutes. There would be his bell ringing in the background. And eventually I said, what is that noise? What's happening? And he said, oh, it's another delivery. I said, what are you getting delivered? So that's what led to that. And then the next day, it was still lying there. So we just looked at what he was doing, and like it was packaged there, and then there was the instructions. So he was trying to read it out, and we were instructing him, and it was like asking questions and directing him. What would you use? And we didn't do the whole. Obviously, he made it up after the class, most of it, but it was like the preparation for it. So it's like, on a way, it was like describing a process as well. So it was helpful for their IELTS and writing, because that's one of the tasks, describing a process. So I'm always thinking, how can this tie in to like their 4 skills, all the time. So we had all the 4 skills were definitely covered in that. And the next day he actually showed us, he took us to see the finished item. So that was, it kind of rounded it up, and it was quite good.
Such a good point. I think it's so important that in this situation that you link whatever is happening in class back either to the course book or to the tests that the students are studying for, so that students can see the point of what they're doing in class. Because obviously in a situation where course books maybe haven't been designed for the current situation, I think it's very easy to deviate from that and for students just to feel that whatever they're learning isn't really going anywhere.
Definitely, you've got to make sure that everything you do is going to be tied into that, because you could just have a good time like looking around people's houses, and it's not so productive. That we need to remember they're actually paying for a service.
Do you want to tell us about how you do that in class then? How do you relate the class content back to the learning goals?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it's in the structure. Like they know the structure that my lesson's going to be, and like at first I would have them doing something in the chat box when they're all waiting, because people arrive just at random times, because it's very, very difficult to motivate yourself to get out of bed when you don't actually have to go out physically. So I have that problem. So when they arrive, they can do something like an activity in the chat box, like write a sentence about something or post a comment for somebody else, or like a letter and find an animal, a vegetable, all these kind of things. And then after that, we usually use the flipped lesson approach. I think that's the best. So they've done a lot of the work at home. So maybe like the fun stuff, like they've looked at the video, they've done a podcast, something like that, or a blog. They've maybe sent on a file with their speaking or something, Vocaroo. So they'll go into a chat room and then they'll do a task connected to that. And then we'll maybe come back, we'll do a fun thing then. So we'll maybe look out the window, see what we can see, describe that, or we'll show videos of what we've been doing in our walks outside. And from there, I kind of evolve it from what happens. But I've got a structure in my head, but I really take it, what they produce, and then we'll work with that.
You mentioned videos there from students' walks outside.
Yeah.
Do you want to tell us a bit more about those? What are they and how do you use them?
What I've done before is we've taken, because we're only allowed to go out here for an hour on our isolation walks. When they're outside, I've asked them if they could maybe take a video of where they go, because that kind of motivates other people. So it's quite boring to be in your house for 23 hours a day. So somebody showed the cherry blossom and he was holding it in his hand and describing that. So then when we came back in, we're listening to that, we're looking at what he did and then making up questions and things from that as well. And then they can follow that through with writing summaries. So to practice the vocabulary, we'll obviously focus on like a grammatical point as well that's come up.
Again, I think that's really great. Really making lessons highly personalized. And with sharing those videos, again, You're doing something online that I think would be more challenging to do offline. Another thing I know that you've done before that I thought sounded fantastic was taking students on virtual tours of tourist attractions.
Yes, we either do these at home or I quite like to do them in the class so that the students are interacting with each other as well. So we'll maybe share the videos as well because they can get a lot more communication out of that. So some of the things that I've done are when I was looking on the internet, because we're in lockdown and it's a bit kind of boring. So a lot of things have been put online free for people to use just now. For example, there's Google Arts and Culture. They've made I think it's over 2,000 things free, like cultural attractions, and people can go and they can take a virtual tour there. So I thought, I wonder if I could use this, adapt these into the lessons in any way. So we can do things. We've gone into museums. There's the British Museum, all the famous museums everywhere, the Louvre, all these, and you can take a virtual tour and walk around it. And then you can click on different artifacts and find out information about these. And I can write like a quiz for the students as if they were actually going around the museum physically. Practices writing, practices speaking, listening as well, everything. We also had Edinburgh Zoo as well. You can look at live webcams of different animals there. They were able to choose one animal, for example, the panda. They could look and see what they were doing. And then you can go to the page on the website all about the giant panda and all the information about that as well. So they were finding out information about different animals, about the habitats and the history of the animals, all that kind of vocabulary as well. And another good one that I've just done, I was doing it yesterday and today, we took a virtual tour of Buckingham Palace. I shared the screen with them. So we took like the virtual tour together so we could speak about it. Like we were going around there in a group rather than just looking at it. So I wanted them to be interacting with each other and describing like what they saw, like the materials. There was gold and plaster and all the different fabrics and the colours and all the objects. So we can look in like in the throne room and we can hear the Queen speaking, so we can listen and making up like a web quest for them to go around and find out different things. And then after that, they go into breakout rooms and they chose artifacts or like painting or the throne or something like that. And they could click on it, find out the information, and they were going to write a summary. So paired writing.
And again, I think that's something that's useful on two levels, isn't it? Because it's great language practice, but it's also plugging a gap that students can't do these things outside of class at the moment.
Because we're missing out on all of that. They signed up to come for a cultural experience here and they're not getting it. So I'm trying to give them some of that as well that they're missing out on.
Now, those breakout rooms that you mentioned there, they must be a huge help in keeping students engaged and involved.
Especially if you have a large class and especially if they're sitting with their videos turned off, people can get lost in the class. Sometimes you don't maybe know if they've fallen asleep or what, or you've forgotten about them. If you're going around asking people and someone's quiet and you just see a blank screen, it's very easy to forget about somebody like that. So the breakout rooms, they can work in 2s or 3s, small groups, and you can choose the rooms. You can do it randomly or you can manipulate it to have like stronger and weaker students together, just like in a classroom. And it's good because then they have a chance to interact just with 1 or 2 other people. So it really replicates the classroom situation. And the teacher can just pop out and in of each room. The only thing is you really need to set it up very, very carefully beforehand because you can't be in 2 places at the one time. So if somebody's gone off on the wrong track, they might be the last room that you arrive at and they're sitting there and they haven't done a thing.
Yeah, I think some of those aspects of classroom management, like group work, are obviously so different to teaching offline. And especially when students turn off their webcams. That's sort of the equivalent of students coming to class with a paper bag over their heads.
We can't enforce it though. I say to them, it's your choice. And I understand if they've maybe just got up or something. And you've just got to work with that because you're going into their home. They might not want you to see like their personal possessions there's lots of reasons why they wouldn't have that video on. So I fully understand that, but it does make it pretty difficult to gauge how they're working. If they're working quietly, that's why I don't have a lot of individual work.
That was Morag MacIntosh, everyone. Thanks, Morag, for joining us. Thanks, everyone, for listening. and we'll see you again next time. Goodbye.